The trade deadline is fast approaching and rumors are swirling about the Mariners. It's time to put on our tinfoil hats and talk about what's going on here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ahoy, sailors. It is Friday, July 28th, 2023. This is Trident Gonzalez and Colby Patnett for the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you so much for making us your first listen. Subscribe, like, and turn on alerts if you're watching on YouTube, or subscribe and leave a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform if you like what you hear. And if you're part of the crew and rock with us every single day, let us know in the comments below. And if you want to hear from us even more, please consider signing up for our Patreon. You can now get a free 7-day trial to check out the show. The link, as well as our social accounts, is in the description of this episode. Today, we're going to answer the question, what is Jerry Dipoto and Justin Hollander cooking? Obviously, there was a report last night from Ken Rosenthal that sent everyone in the Mariners community into a frenzy. We're going to talk all about that. But Colby, let's start here. The Mariners are beginning a 3-game series with the Arizona Diamondbacks tonight. You can catch all the action on the Mariners hometown broadcast of SiriusXM via the SXM app, of course. And Jerry Dipoto on the Wheelhouse podcast. Apparently, I haven't personally listened to this episode of the Wheelhouse, but I've seen a lot of people on Twitter saying that he said this, that the next 4 games are going to determine a lot with the trade deadline and how the Mariners approach the trade deadline. So, Colby, what do you make of that comment? And do you think that's the smart way to go about things if you're the Mariners and if you're Jerry Dipoto?
No, which is why I don't believe that's what he's saying. Like, I believe maybe that's what he's saying publicly, but no, you can't go, 103 games into the year now or whatever. And you can't wait 4 more games to decide whether or not you're a buyer or a seller. You have to know now. If you don't know now, you're a seller. It's really that simple. If you don't know for sure right now that you're a buyer, you're a seller. And the Mariners aren't sellers. We know they're not sellers. They've already said it as much. They're not selling. So no, I don't buy it. Also, worth noting that podcast was recorded a week ago. So yeah, cool. Awesome. It's not a big deal. There's nothing to read here. And every 4-game series or every 4 games is a big 4 games now. But I just refuse to believe that Jerry Dipoto is going to decide based on a 4-game sample whether or not his team is buying, because you can't just wait until deadline day to decide whether or not you're going to buy or sell. You're having those conversations now. And if you decide to wait and see how your team does, you're going to lose players because the sellers are not going to wait and see with you. Mm-hmm. So if there's a deal available right now that Jerry can make that makes them better, he should do it without hesitation. He should do it, because you can't sit and let a 2-2 stretch dictate one way or the other, because at the end of the day, they are probably going to be between 4.5 and 6.5 back after this 4-game stretch, regardless of how they do. Because Toronto has to win, 3 out of 4 or whatever, and Houston has to win all 4 to even put you in the position where you're like 8-9 back. You can't, you can't have your cake and eat it too, Jerry. Either you're in and you believe in this team and you're going to invest in them, or you're not. You can't be in the middle right now and say, well, we're not sure. Yes, you are. You are absolutely sure. You made up your mind already. And the longer you wait, the more poorly things can go for you. Because if you wait until the deadline day, not only are you not going to have that guy for the next 4 games, you're probably not going to have him for another 2 games after that. Because it takes a while for physicals and for guys to get acclimated. And typically you're not, they're flying across the country and whatnot. So yeah, no, you can't just punt 6 games because, we want to see how these next 4 go. No, I don't believe Jerry when he says that, because I don't believe Jerry Dipoto is stupid. And 4 games, one way or the other, is not going to make a significant difference. Because let's say they win all 4, best case scenario, they win all 4. Cool. Awesome. What did you gain from that? Right. Literally nothing. Nothing from waiting. You could have had more players earlier. And by the way, I understand this idea, like as you get closer to the deadline, maybe the prices drop. No, that's not how it works.
Yeah, you run a major risk of letting the market pass you by. And Jerry has talked about that specifically when talking about the offseason and reflecting on this past offseason and kind of his regrets. And a big part of that is misreading the trade market. So I can't believe that he would make the same mistake again when he is very recently acknowledged that. So yeah, I think they've already made their decision because, again, yeah, mathematically they could be 8.5 back after the next 4 games, right? But a lot has to happen. And yeah, if you're 8.5 back, then yeah, that probably changes things, right? Because your odds of making a run towards the postseason pretty slim at that point. But
right,
again, I think you're probably like, what is most likely going to happen? You're probably just going to be in the same spot that you're in right now, which is still within reach of the postseason, still have a lot of talent. Even if you just add complementary pieces to the talent that you already have, you have a good shot of making a run towards the postseason. You still have a lot of teams that you have to fend off here, and you got to catch up to a couple teams here, all that, whatever. But again, we've talked about this, that there's a pretty clear path to them still making a run and getting into October. So again, with that in mind, and I also saw a quote from the same show of him saying that he's basically has the 2023 team at the forefront of his mind when it comes to the deadline. So I think that says to me, at the very least, they are going to add to some degree to this roster.
right.
So I don't think that the needle moves significantly in one way or the other with what is realistically going to happen over the next 4 days.
Right. And the idea that like, oh no, we better not trade Alberto Rodriguez for Tommy Pham because in 4 days we might be 8.5 back. That's stupid. It's idiotic. And there's no way Jerry's thinking like that, because you can replace to get Mark Cannon, to get Tommy Pham, to get whoever, any one of these just decent bat rentals, Randall Grichuk, whoever you're giving up, you can easily replace, and you will replace, because guys will get better in your own system. You've already replaced some of them with the draft, and you'll replace even more next year. So this idea that like, oh, well, we don't want to be too aggressive on these rentals too early because if we lose 4 in a row, you're not giving up anything to get them anyways. So spare me that line of logic. It doesn't make sense. Jerry's not doing that. So in short, I don't buy his sentiment that like, oh, we might wait for these 4 games and see how those. No, you're not. No, you're not. So yeah, I don't believe him.
So let's quickly talk about this series coming up here against the Diamondbacks. Fortunately, you're going to miss Zach Gallen. Diamondbacks pitching staff after Gallen, not that imposing, but they do have a very talented offense, of course, led by the local kid, Corbin Carroll. Geraldo Perdomo's an all-star this year. They have a lot of speed with guys like Jake McCarthy, Alec Thomas. So it's a difficult matchup for the Mariners, to be sure. But what are your thoughts overall heading into the series?
Yeah, you gotta win the series. The pitching does favor you, but it is a tough matchup. You didn't even mention Ketel Marte, which is kind of fitting since he's seems to be the most overrated or underrated player in all of baseball this year. Didn't even make an all-star team, and his numbers are insane. So this is an offense that can swing it a little bit. They also incredibly aggressive on the bases. They will steal bags in this series, and the Mariners aren't particularly good at that, at preventing that. So
really,
yeah, it's a bit of a mismatch from that perspective. But you are a better roster. Mm-hmm. You have better pitching. You're coming off the day off, which you desperately needed. So the bullpen should be in decent shape. So yeah, I think for me, I think it's a totally reasonable expectation to go out and win this series. You hope that the bats continue what we saw in Minnesota, for at least a couple of these games, and you can kind of, it'd just be nice to just cruise to a 7-3 victory at some point where you can kind of throw, Devin Sweet for the last 2 innings and not really worry about it. But yeah, it's nice that the bullpen got a day off they desperately need. You have the pitching advantage. This isn't a great ballpark for you with your outfield defense. It's kind of hit or miss right now. It's not a great matchup. When these guys get on base, they're going to steal bags on you. So it's not an easy trip down to Arizona, but you are catching them at the right time because you're not going to face Gallen, and they are struggling right now. I think they've won 6 out of their last like 20 or something like that. Like it's been a rough month for Arizona, so you should be okay. And I think it's fair based on all those factors to expect them to win this series, and they should.
All right. Well, let's get into the meat and potatoes of our show. We're going to be talking about that Ken Rosenthal article that dropped last night that sent Mariners Twitter and the Mariners community in general into a frenzy, and that includes you and I. Even we spent a lot of time last night speculating, trying to figure out deals that make sense, all that. So we're going to talk all about that in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by eBay Motors. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head on over to eBay Motors. With the eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know the part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you again for making us your first listen. Again, you can catch the Mariners and the Diamondbacks tonight on the Mariners hometown broadcast with SiriusXM via the SXM app. So Ken Rosenthal of The Athletic is talking about the Mariners. He wrote last night that he has been told the Mariners are considering trading one of their starting pitchers for a package. Keyword there, package, that includes a bat of similar or better value. So trading the starter is something, trading one of your starters is something that you and I, Colby, have not been a fan of. And that's really because even last night, with all the digging that we did and all the talking that we did about what this could possibly be, we didn't land on a lot of options that make a ton of sense. Now, you and I have been doing this for years, and this wouldn't be the first time that we thought we've explored all possibilities, and then Jerry DiPoto somehow found a way to still surprise us. But on the Rosenthal report specifically, do you think there's validity to this? And what do you make of it in general?
I do think there's some validity to it. I do believe that, just the kind of bigger point of Rosenthal's article is that controllable starting pitching is the hottest commodity that really the other 29 teams want. And that's, kind of something that is probably being overlooked. Like you're just not like, it's not like only like World Series contenders are going to be interested in your pitching. So is Kansas City. And so is, Colorado. Like everybody should be interested in the Mariners pitching. And so, in the totality of his point, I do think that teams are calling Seattle about their pitching. I do think that Seattle's at least entertaining those possibilities. I mean, why wouldn't they? And I suppose because he does say they do have a package that they're considering, that a team, at least one team, has made an offer that is, worthy of the Mariners' consideration. So I do believe it mostly. I don't believe that. I would still be pretty surprised if the Mariners made a move like this where they trade one of their young pitchers for a package. But the fact that, it's been leaked that, this is, something that they have in hand and they're at least considering it, like that tells you that there's at least one team out there that has made a really good offer that is enough for the Mariners to consider trading one of their young arms, which is kind of what their entire franchise is built around, those young arms in Julio. So I do believe most of it. I think maybe the part where I'm like, I don't see it is the idea that it's like likely to happen. I think Seattle has it in their back pocket. I think that they are, they've at least, internally discussed it amongst themselves, but do I think it's likely that this deal that we're ever even going to know what the deal is? Probably not. But we'll see.
So if you had to put money on it right now, right this second, if there actually is an offer out there that the Mariners are legitimately considering, who do you think the pitcher, or who do you think is the pitcher? Because it's not Kirby, it's not Castillo. So that leaves Wu, Miller, and then Gilbert, who's obviously been the target of a lot of rumors lately. So do you think it's Gilbert? Do you think it's one of the young guys? You had to put money on it. Who are you taking right now?
I'd probably say it's Gilbert. The interesting part about, this conversation is that Gilbert has 4 years of club control after this year. So he will be Super 2. So he will be ARB eligible, but whatever, who cares? 4 years of club control instead of 3, which makes him, super valuable, obviously, to everybody. But there are scenarios where this team, if they are not a contender this year, they might prefer Bryce Miller or Brian Wu because they have, 2 full seasons of club control more than Gilbert does, and they're not going to get paid for another 2 years. So, it's totally possible there's a surprise team out there like Kansas City who wants Miller, and like they like Gilbert, but they think Miller can be just as good, and Kansas City's not going to be good for another 2 or 3 years anyway. So we'll just take, Miller, and that's hypothetical. But if I had to guess, I would guess it's probably Logan Gilbert, because honestly, I feel like I have a decent idea of like what teams are capable of making such a package offer, and what teams make a lot, which teams have the firepower and which teams have the desire / guts, I guess, to make such a move. So I have a pretty good idea of what that list is, and it's only 3 or 4 teams, I would imagine, and I think Gilbert fits for most of them. So I would say it's probably Gilbert.
I agree that it's Gilbert. Yeah, I just kind of feel it in my bones, and Rosenthal did write about Gilbert a couple of nights ago. Again, there aren't a lot of options. There aren't a lot of guys out there that I look at that are, again, as Rosenthal put it last night, of equal or better value to Gilbert. There aren't a ton of bats that fit that criteria, in my opinion. Maybe the Mariners feel differently. But Rosenthal wrote a couple of nights ago about Gilbert and the Cardinals, which has obviously been a big thing. John Morosi has mostly been the one pushing that, but now Rosenthal's thrown his hat into the ring on that front. That any package the Mariners would even consider from St. Louis for Gilbert would start with Lars Nootbaar, but that wouldn't be the end of it. So my thought here is, would the Mariners consider a package that includes Nootbaar and Nolan Gorman, or Brendan Donovan, or like Jordan Walker and Dylan Carlson, something like that? Do you think, first of all, do you think either of those are possible? And second of all, do you think that would be worth it to the Mariners in the end?
So we'll say this. There seems to be a lot of smoke around the idea that the Mariners are looking to acquire an impact bat. I mean, we even kind of had like the little, what we consider to be a joke about Nolan Arenado. Like, oh, the Mariners could make sense for Arenado. Like Nolan Arenado's waiving his no trade clause to come to Seattle.
Right.
But there does seem to be a lot of smoke to that idea. But if that's true, is Lars Nootbaar that big bat? Like, no. And they've already said they're not trading Nootbaar, which again, GMs say a lot this time of year. So take everything. But
again, is Nootbaar and Donovan, a couple of guys that are going to be 3-win players this year? Does that equal one impact bat in the Mariners' eyes? Like,
I don't know. I don't know. It's tough because, like, first of all, again, we've talked about Nootbaar before. We like the player. He is not a headliner. He is a 3-win player who might make an all-star team or two in his career. He is not an all-star caliber player. That's like it's semantics, but whatever. I think you guys get what we're trying to say about Nootbaar. And then I don't think they're going to trade Jordan Walker, who not a tremendous fit for Seattle anyways. He's pretty much a first base only anyway. So Nolan Gorman, not a second baseman, not in the long run, not really good one right now. He's a third baseman, but I mean, you could fake him at second base for the rest of this year. Sure. No problem.
Sure.
I just don't see them doing that in addition to Nootbaar. So I think that their idea would be like Nootbaar and Tommy Edman or Nootbaar and Dylan Carlson. And to me, no, like that's just no. I'm not interested in that.
Yeah.
The only thing that the Cardinals have going for them is that they can provide a pitcher back to Seattle, who Seattle can slide into their rotation. Whereas some of the other teams I thought of, they really don't have that guy. Like they don't have a Jordan Montgomery that they could throw in on the back end of this deal to kind of help the Mariners maintain their rotation in 2023. So I still don't see it. I don't see the card. If they're willing to put Gorman and Nootbaar on the table and Montgomery or Flaherty or whoever, like, okay, we can have a conversation, but short of like something like that, like I'm not Dylan Carlson cannot be the second best player I get for because that means Lars Nootbaar is the best, and that's not something I'm interested in.
Yeah, to me, any deal that has Carlson as the second best player that I'm even thinking about, that I'm not immediately hanging up on, is Jordan Walker as the headliner. And I don't think the Cardinals are going to do that. And again, like you said, Walker's not a perfect fit for the Mariners. So yeah, the problem with the Cardinals in general, and like it's not just with Gilbert. We've talked about this a lot on this show with the Cardinals. It's just even for Miller, even for Wu, I'm not super thrilled by the idea of trading one of those guys for Lars Nootbaar or Nolan Gorman or Tommy Edman or whatever. I just think that Wu or Miller or Gilbert, they're worth more than that. I think those are fine players. They're good players that would help you. That certainly fill needs that you have on your roster. But the Mariners have a very unique situation that a lot of teams would die for right now, where they have 5 legit middle of the rotation or better arms. Why give that up? Why get so desperate for a bat, and not even that good of a bat, not a star, to trade one of those arms and go from an elite situation with your pitching staff to just pretty good? Why do that for Lars Nootbaar? Why do that for Nolan Gorman?
Right. Yeah, I continue to see St. Louis as just not a really good fit for this type of trade. Again, unless they want to overpay, which is certainly possible. Teams get desperate, but maybe. I just don't see it.
You're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you again for making us your first listen. Again, you can catch the Mariners and the Diamondbacks tonight on the Mariners hometown broadcast of SiriusXM via the SXM app. So let's get wild here. Let's just get super unhinged for the content, for the views, right? If they traded Logan Gilbert, who's the bat that makes sense? Because to me, there's only a couple of guys that I'm even considering, especially mid-season, right? You guys know how I feel about trading a starter mid-season as opposed to in the winter, when there are far more options to fill out that spot that they're vacating. Mm-hmm. And there's one name that you and I both kind of landed on last night when we were talking amongst ourselves, and that's Randy Arozarena of the Tampa Bay Rays. So Gilbert has 4 years of club control after this year. Arozarena has 3. And even though that Arozarena is an established, big league, everyday outfielder who's just made an all-star team, is kind of a star without being a star, right? He's basically been a 3-win player. He's been around what we think like Lars Nootbaar could potentially be.
He's a bit overrated. Like, but just call it what it is.
But he's a household name mostly because of the 2020 playoffs.
Right.
Yeah.
In his rookie year, he had like a 158 WRC plus or something like that. But he's settled into like the 120 to 130 range. Like, that's what he is. He's a good player.
Again, yeah. But again, he's like a 3-win player, which isn't necessarily a star. So to me, even though that the club control mostly lines up, you're giving up 1 extra year of Gilbert for 3 years of a Rosarena. The Rays have to throw in more here. And you want mostly, I would think, mostly major league ready or established major league talent on top of a Rosarena. And when I look at the Rays, I go, why would they do that? Why would they shake up their roster to that kind of degree when they're right in the hunt for the AL East? Obviously, they've fallen off a bit here, but a Rosarena is a big piece of what they're doing right now. Like, why would they trade a Rosarena? Do they actually need Logan Gilbert that bad to do something that drastic?
I think they do. Zach Eflin's off getting an MRI. He's been their best pitcher by a mile. So really it's McClanahan, who's had his own issues this year. And, Taj Bradley's fine. Like their pitching's fine, but it's not great. It's not carry them through the playoffs. And I think their hope would be is that it would be Eflin. It would be Eflin, Gilbert, and McClanahan is kind of like how they're going to build this thing. And we have to remember is that the Rays do have tremendous offensive depth. They still have Harold Ramirez. They still have Jose Siri. They have Manny Margot. Like they have the guys to replace Rosarena, at least just, on the field. They have the guys to replace him. So yeah, I think, when I look at it, I think they look at their pitching and they're trying to be realistic about it in a playoff situation. And it's not just their start, like Jeffrey Springs is out for the year, Rasmussen is out for the year, but they also have a pretty banged up bullpen too. Like they need pitching. They absolutely need pitching, not just to catch Baltimore, but to beat Baltimore or to beat, the Astros or the Rangers. They need pitching. They need more pitching. So do I think they would probably prefer to trade some prospects for a pretty good arm? Yeah, they were linked to Lance Lynn, but they didn't land him. And quite frankly, Logan Gilbert is significantly better than any rental pitcher that's available at the deadline for them.
Yeah.
And he's a long-term solution. So I could see it. And when we talk about, like who is the Logan Gilbert equivalent of offense, somebody who has a high floor of being at least, a 3-win player, maybe a 4-win player, but there's also some ceiling still there. There's still enough ceiling that he could maybe put out a 5 or 6-win season at some point.
Yeah.
Who is that guy? A Rosarena is really the only one I came up with that makes any sense for their team to trade right now. So yeah, I think, again, this is total speculation. We don't know. Maybe Gilbert's not even the guy, right? Maybe it's Bryce Miller for I don't know, Bobby Witt, or maybe it's Bryce Miller for Ryan McMahon and Brendan Rodgers. I don't know, right? We don't know what it is, but I think just based on what we've been able to piece together, based on where all the smoke is coming from and how consistent it is with this one guy, I think Gilbert's probably the guy. And when you look at it, who's the team that needs pitching, has the ability to put together a package? That's the key word, a package, meaning more than one player, who has a bat that is of roughly similar age and skill set to Logan Gilbert. It's Randy Arozarena, and it's Tampa Bay Rays. So to me, that's kind of where I landed.
And even then, it's not a perfect fit because they don't have that pitcher to give you to offset the loss of
you got to go out.
Gilbert. Now, that's not like the death of any talks there, because even as Rosenthal speculated last night, a lot of teams are apparently interested in Teoscar Hernandez. He thought maybe you could turn around and flip Teoscar for that pitcher that you need to help, kind of balance out the loss of Gilbert. But it's complicated. It's complicated. There is not a perfect fit here when we're talking about equal comp for Gilbert. And again,
are we doubting the Mariners and Rays' ability to get creative?
Oh no, I would not put it past either one of those teams for sure.
I feel like if anybody can work through these things, it would be DePoto and the Rays front office.
And maybe there's a third team that, I don't.
Who knows?
Yeah, it could get very, very unhinged very quickly.
Just throw out like what my initial trade idea was.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
So my thought is, and Ty and I both were like, I don't even know if this is enough. So, because again, there's no precedent for trading like Logan Gilbert in the middle of the year.
Well, yeah, because like you and I were talking about this last night, that the closest we could think of was the Chris Archer deal from a few years ago. But that was 1.5 years of Archer, who was worse than Gilbert's
already
year.
better than Archer ever was.
And Archer got the Rays Tyler Glasnow, who had already thrown like 80 plus innings at the big league level. Austin Meadows, who had about 2 months of major league experience under his belt, and then Shane Baz, who was a top 100, consensus prospect across the league.
Right.
Like, what does Logan Gilbert get you if you're comparing those two? Like, it has to be more, and it kind of feels like it has to be significantly more, right?
Right. I mean, I guess you would argue that Arozarena is significantly more when you're acquiring him than Austin Meadows, and so that's some of it. Sure. Okay. But still, like, you're not doing Gilbert for Arozarena straight up. At least I wouldn't. And according to Rosenthal, the Mariners wouldn't either, if this is a package deal, remember. So the only thing I thought, I was like, okay, well, what else do the Rays have that the Mariners could use that wouldn't hurt the Rays too much? And the Rays have some second base depth. They have some guys who can play up the middle. They have Taylor Walls, they have Brujan, but you're not trading like Taylor Walls and Brujan aren't going to carry the rest of this deal. So the only other guy that I thought of was maybe Brandon Lau.
Josh Lowe, Nathaniel Lowe, Brandon Lau.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, it's Brandon Lau, who, by the way, has his own issues, right? He's got a back thing, hasn't played a ton, hasn't been as good.
By the way, real quick, did the Rays like consciously do that? Because they also had Nathaniel Lowe in their organization.
They might have. I mean, this is the team who wrote the 8675309 lineup a few years back. So
sure.
Yeah, maybe. But it just, Brandon Lau makes some sense still. And because he's a left-handed bat, which the Mariners need, because he plays second base, the Mariners need a second baseman, but he's making some money. It's not a huge contract. It's not a contract that you can't swallow, but it is, a fairly significant sum. And the Rays have been fine without him for most of this year. Could that be a guy that the Mariners look to maybe take on and fix? Because as much as he struggled, he's still a significant upgrade over what you've got at second base right now. Yeah. And then on top of that, I think you're looking at somebody like Jonathan Aranda, who is a guy that Ty likes, but he's a good hitter. He can hit.
He's left-handed Ty France, though.
Yeah, and that's the problem, is that he's probably first base only. So, even that, you can kind of look at that and you say, okay, so Arozarena, Brandon Lau, and Jonathan Aranda for sounds like a lot. And it is. It's a good amount. But we're talking about for 4 years and 2 months of Logan Gilbert.
Gilbert's a top 20 starting pitcher in baseball right now.
And Lau has back issues, who has a couple years left on a slightly inflated contract, who hasn't been really all that good for the last 2 years. And Aranda is a very limited player, at least, versatility wise and defense wise. And you're hoping he hits. We don't know that he hasn't hit at the major league level yet.
Yeah.
He hasn't produced. We think he will, because he's a good hitter, but you got to hit good, So it's one of those things where I don't know if that's enough even, but I don't know how much further you can stretch it. So I don't know how this is part of the reason why I don't think the Mariners are ultimately going to do this deal. I don't know how you value Logan Gilbert. There's just no comp that we've seen that makes sense to trade Logan Gilbert for. So anything we say, it could be an overpay, it could be an underpay. We just don't know. Right. But I do feel like the Rays are the best bet, and I don't know if they have enough.
So Arozarena is on a 162 game pace for a 3.8 F4 season. That would be, I believe, his career high, or would tie his career high. Yeah, he was 3.8 back in 2021 as well. Gilbert's pretty much on the same course right now. He's at 2.3 F4. Randy's at 2.5 right now. But again, extra year club control. Randy's a corner outfielder. He's not an up the middle player, and Gilbert's a starting pitcher. So the valuations are a lot different here. So I do believe that the Rays need to add more here if you're talking about a deal for Gilbert. And again, with where the Rays are right now and what the Mariners are going to want back, because they're not going to want prospects back. Maybe a prospect on top of whatever.
Yeah,
like fine.
I think that prospect is going to be an Aranda type, somebody who's a highly ranked prospect who has played in the majors a little bit.
And there's probably going to need to be another major league piece. And maybe, the Mariners throw in Paul Sewald here, and then you get more
Murphy.
back. Yeah, or Tom Murphy, whatever.
Oscar Hernandez,
but then you're going to need even more back from Tampa for that reason as well. So I don't know, man. it's crazy. So I'm going to throw out a couple more names that I was just like, who would I trade Logan Gilbert for? Who would I be willing to, or not even who would I definitively trade him for? Just who would I even like pause?
Who would you consider to
it?
be a headliner in a package?
Bo Bichette, 2 years or 2.5 years of Bo Bichette, maybe.
It's a lot of club control to give up.
Juan Soto,
but only for a year and 2 months.
Ooh. Yeah, it's basically 2 postseason runs with Soto, and he's probably out of here. 99%,
absolutely.
99% he's out of here. So after that, Cedric Mullins,
maybe.
Again, there aren't a lot of good fits here, man. And again, it's because of how unprecedented this would be if they did trade someone like Logan Gilbert. We do not see this every year. So I don't know. I don't know. I mean, like we heard from Ryan Divish on Sea Level. Shout out to a friend of the show, Ben Ranieri. He interviewed Ryan Divish about a week ago. Divish told him that the Mariners reportedly were willing to include Gilbert in a package to the Nationals for 2.5 years of Soto. So with that knowledge, would they be willing to do Gilbert for 1.5 years of Soto? Like, especially with where they are right now, like they're not guaranteed a postseason berth. Obviously, they would be, I mean, offensively, at least they would be significantly better with Juan Soto. Like their chances on that end would improve pretty significantly with Juan Soto, but it's not perfect. It's not perfect. I just like, I know that's like everyone's favorite idea is like, oh yeah, trade Gilbert for Blake Snell and Juan Soto, but also like, is that enough from Seattle? Do the Padres think that's enough? Because like, I don't know how much I would be willing to tack on to Logan Gilbert for 1.5 years of Soto and a couple of months of Blake Snell.
I know the answer to that one. 0.
Yeah.
You tack on your end.
Yeah.
For a year and 2 months of Juan Soto, I'm not giving you an all-star quality pitcher for 4 years of that. Nope. You tack on your end and get back to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And like Blake Snell would obviously make up the difference for 2 months. But then, because again, you're not, when we talk about trades, you are not trading thinking, oh yeah, I can extend this guy or I can re-sign this guy. That does not factor into the cost at all.
And by the way, that's not just us saying that. Jerry freaking DePoto said that yesterday. So if you have a problem with that line of logic, don't take it up with us. Take it up with every single person in baseball. Okay.
Yeah, every GM thinks that way.
Every GM. Every
at least
single
the smart
one.
ones.
Because they're not stupid.
Well,
you cannot assume an extension. That's why I'm glad the Angels bought, so we don't have to deal with any more of those BS Shohei Ohtani. Oh, well, you just signed him to an extension. You could guarantee me he signs to an extension. I'd give up. You can't. You never could.
Yeah. No, you can't. And even if you can, that still does not factor into the return. Even last year with Luis Castillo, they were able to extend Castillo about 6 weeks after acquiring him. But when they acquired him, they were not trading Noelvi Marte and Edwin Arroyo thinking, oh yeah, we're going to extend Castillo. Like, yeah, we're more than fine trading these prospects because we can sign Castillo to an extension. No, you are paying for what he is at the time, which is at the time with Castillo, 1.5 years of club control, right? You're paying for that. And so with Soto, you're paying for 1.5 years. With Snell, you would be paying for, half a year. No. And I'm just using that for the whatever. But yeah, that's not, to me, that's not worth Logan Gilbert. That's not worth 4 years of Logan Gilbert, who's a top 20 starter again in Major League Baseball at worst, maybe. Like he might be better
top
than that.
30 at worst. Like,
Yeah.
yeah. But anyways, we got to wrap because we're gonna get yelled at because we're about to cross the 40-minute mark.
But this was fun. I enjoyed this. I enjoyed this. Last night I had a lot of fun actually thinking about all of this. I just again I didn't come to any sort of conclusion that I feel good about, but we'll see. This
And
weekend
we did all
could
this.
Hmm?
I was to say we did all this knowing that this is never going to happen, so we were just wasting our time. We did this knowing we are wasting our time. Oh well,
It's
was
fun though.
Yeah,
I had fun.
no,
Did you have fun?
yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah. That's one way to put it. Yeah. So yeah, this weekend could get pretty crazy. So we'll see. I have a feeling that we'll probably end up doing a show before Monday, before our next scheduled show. That could also just be because the Mariners had a big win down in Arizona or something. Fingers crossed. Hopefully that's the case. Hopefully we have a couple of reasons to do a show on the weekend, or a couple shows on the weekend. So be on the lookout for that. But for now, that's going to do it for us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you so much for joining us here. For Colby Patnode, I'm Trident Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Dane Gonzalez, that's DANEGNZLZ, and Colby at CPAT11, that's CPAT11. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok as well over at Locked On Mariners. You can also find all that stuff in the description of this episode. Thank you again for making us your first listen. Have yourself a beautiful baseball day and a beautiful baseball weekend, and we'll see you next time. Peace.